What's up, you wild and wonderful earthlings? Do you remember me? I'm your host, Sean Slade, and it feels like a while since I have released an episode. So I am thrilled to be sitting in front of the mic today to bring you episode 42 on natural burials. But first, let me fill you in on what has been keeping me from publishing podcasts over the last few months. You may have guessed it if you're a regular listener to this show. I finished my paper that I was working hard over the last, honestly, 8 months writing. Feels great. I know I've talked about it on previous shows, on intros, but I'm doing it again because, it was a big undertaking for me, and I'm really happy with the way it came together and the impact that I hope it will have, or I believe it will have, within the field of nature connection and health. So this paper is a scoping review on the relationship between nature connection and health and well-being within nature-based interventions. So things like ecotherapy and different public health initiatives. So it's done, it's submitted, and I do plan, as I've said before, on breaking this paper down into bite-sized, swallowable pieces for upcoming podcasts so that you guys can consume this knowledge here via the podcast. Because, that's what I think is important, disseminating this knowledge, getting it out to the people so that we can increase control over our health and really heal our relationship with Mother Earth. And I think this paper does a great job at that. So anyways, my next step, getting this out for publication, and then I'll begin my forest therapy study this summer. So that said, if you are a listener and you're interested in becoming a participant in a forest therapy study, please contact me at Sean@rewildmybio.com. That's Sean, SHAWN, or as us Sean's always say, I spell it the right way. But anyways, if you're a forest therapist as well, or let's say if you know someone who's certified in forest therapy through either the ANFT, so the Association of Nature and Forest Therapists, or the GIFT Network, which is the Guild of International Forest Therapists, I could really use your help in securing therapists and or participants. So yeah, stay tuned for more information on that, because that will be my next big undertaking in this PhD. So other than that, I guess what's new on the wild side with me, that's been keeping me from hitting record and publishing podcasts for you guys. Well, I've managed to appear as a guest on a few podcasts as of late, to share my research into nature connection, as well as, discuss different aspects of rewilding, related to vaccines, and just overall living a nature connected life in the face of the pandemic. So I've had a few podcasts that I've done, and those will be out soon. So it's been a lot of fun for me, to be on the other side of the mic for a change, and it was a great honor to appear on some awesome podcasts. So stay tuned via social media or the newsletter for their release. And that said, if you haven't signed up for the newsletter yet, you can find that at rewildmybio.com. There's no spam. I keep you updated on my research. I keep you updated on what's coming down the pipeline for guests. I share resources, discount codes, the whole 9 yards. So we're growing a community over there, an online community, and I actually want to, take this online community and move it onto the land. So that said, speaking of social media and transitioning to the real world, some of you that follow me on social media may have already seen that I've broke ground on the land. I am building a home on the acreage that I am stewarding in the Canadian Shield, and it is a very exciting time for me, to say the least. I'm chomping at the bit, really. I'm chomping at the bit to become Dr. Slade and get this PhD done so that I can start the next phase of helping people connect with nature and self. So that said, when I finish this intro, I'm actually heading up to the land to kick back and connect with nature, because my brain needs a little rewiring after finishing that paper. But also, I'm just going to check out the build. I'm really, really super stoked, to say the least, about that. But without further ado, let's get into today's show. My wild and wonderful guest is Susan Greer. We're also joined by Dr. Richard Vuksinic. And, Richard, honestly, I'm blessed to have him here, as always. He actually has had experience working in the conventional funeral home setting. So it was great, to have him and his input here and his questions and his guidance in this episode today. A bit about Susan, our guest. Susan Greer is the executive director of the Natural Burial Association. She's hell-bent on launching these natural burial grounds all over Ontario, and she's honestly having some great success at doing that. the Natural Burial Association itself builds awareness of the natural burial option. It also supports local advocacy groups, and it gently, as Susan says, lets people know that cremation isn't as eco-friendly as they might think, which was a big surprise to me. Not really a surprise, but after hearing about it, I'm like, yeah, this just makes perfect sense. That obviously using gases and things like that to cremate. But anyways, there's no real one denomination or way in which we approach this. It's any different faith background, what have you. Many people looking towards this as an option because of their love for nature and regenerating green spaces. So I think it's an awesome topic. And honestly, if you're mortal, well, this episode might interest you. What I found awesome about our conversation today is that we enter into it into a heartfelt conversation about death. It's a topic that's not often discussed with, say, the backdrop of nature's beauty and nature's profound ability to connect us to spirit, God, creator, the great mystery, wherever you think you're going after, or however you want to define that. But yeah, today we explore, as we always do on this show, the new old way of something. And that new old way here today is being buried in the ground without the conventional, techniques of embalming and putting in like caskets and big cement blocks and whatnot. So I learned a ton today, honestly, and it really opened my eyes actually to a perspective, or to a whole new layer of nature connection and rewilding. Honestly, I feel like I do my best to bring interesting guests in that sort of decolonize, if you will, aspects of modern life as a way to, of course, increase health and well-being for humans and Mother Earth. And we do this through conversations that allow us to strengthen our relationship with our Mother, the Earth, ourselves, and with each other. But full disclosure, like, this topic really challenged me to step outside of my comfort zone. And I guess it was just nice to find that edge in me, where the wild meets the air quotes civilized. So really challenging myself here on this one. And really not even halfway through this episode, I started seeing visions of my funeral in a designated natural burial site. I actually started to picture that, because it's something that we don't often think about, right? And so yeah, it was awesome to have that reflexivity here in this episode for me as we dove into this topic. So, but speaking of designated sites, let's get into a few specifics that we chatted about today. Finding sites is an aspect of the natural burial process that needs support from rewilders and nature lovers and people just like you. So if this is something that interests you, please reach out to Susan. What else can I say? One thing I really did learn a lot about is the environmental impact of conventional burials. How cremation isn't as eco-friendly as we might think. Please note, we did have some technical difficulties while Susan was discussing some of the environmental impacts. She cut out just for a second or two, but I swooped in, saved the day on a technical front, and did my best to recap what Susan had to say. But what I really found interesting is thinking of death outside of the medicalized / industrialized framework that I have come to understand death through. I think many of us have come to understand death through, right? The smell of the funeral home, the smell of the flowers. Now I just replace that with nature, birds chirping. You're in a conservation type natural burial setting. Like, really, a natural burial is a regeneration and conservation issue or topic. And that is through the way in which these natural burial sites are managed. So I really had no idea, really, again, rewilded or decolonized my own thinking about what happens to our bodies when we die. It was really amazing to, realize how much nature contact and nature connection has helped me personally with, through any grieving process that I've ever been through, when I've lost a loved one. And I'm really thinking how a natural burial can assist with this healing process, right, for the people that lost a loved one. So really, I'm not going to say much more, but I will direct you to the natural burial website, which is www.com, naturalburialassociation.ca. And I encourage you to take a look at their preparation guide if you're interested in being laid to rest in a wilderness setting. Also, if you want to get involved securing and creating more natural burial grounds and creative awareness, Susan would most definitely love to hear from you. So you can also find them, Natural Burial Association, on Facebook and Instagram. And I will make sure that everything we discuss here today is linked in the show notes, and that is over at rewildmybio.com/natural burial. So without further ado, I bring you today's episode. Welcome to Rewild My Bio, a self-help and alternative health podcast. I'm your host, Sean Slade. Join me as I share stories, science, and strategies to help you rewild your biology and redefine your biography. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Rewild My Bio. I'm here with Richard and Susan. Susan's from the Natural Burial Association, and we're really excited to kick this one off and dive into a topic that really, as we just mentioned, is more rewilding and nature connection than I think we've ever covered here on the show, because we often talk about nature connection and how that brings vitality and well-being to our life. However, we never really talk about what happens when you pass away and then your body could actually revitalize nature while you're gone. So Susan, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So I mean, I guess first and foremost, before we get too far into it, I mean, I do want to kind of bring to light Richard's experience in the funeral home industry, right? So I think, Richard's always here doing the co-host thing so graciously, but you actually have a lot, I think, to add to this one. So I'm looking forward to your questions and stories as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to illuminate some of this for our audience in terms of what's emerging in the post-life realm in terms of how we decide to park ourselves for eternity, and really unpacking some of that. And, people our listeners, might be surprised to hear what the conventional burial scenario sounds like and how impactful that is on our earth in a way that's not necessarily great.
Yeah.
So maybe unpacking a little bit of that and how this emergence of the Natural Burial Association and what you're advocating for, Susan, what that might be able to open up in terms of potential for some of us who think in terms of, well, what happens after I die? What do we do with my physical remains? Do they go back to the earth? Are they pumped full of chemicals? Where does this go? And so I'm just excited that there is this advocacy going on and that you guys are bringing this to the table in a way that really seems like it has some really great minds and inspired people behind it. Looking at sort of the people that are involved with the Natural Burial Association is pretty inspiring. People who, had a lot to do with magazines like Chickadee, for example. Right?
I know.
Yeah, which is an awesome magazine for when I was growing up as a kid. So just really seeing a lot of advocacy coming through with a group of inspiring people. So just take this opportunity just to tell us a little bit about Natural Burial Association and what your mission is.
Yeah, definitely. I think I don't want to give us more credit than we deserve, because we're one of many, many groups out there in the world, really, that are advocating for natural burial. But natural burial, the NBA, as I like to call us, was started in 2005 by these people for whom I have so much admiration. Richard, you mentioned Marianne Brinkman. So she was the co-founder of Owl and Chickadee magazine that are all about bringing nature to kids. And she partnered with Michael DePontier, who's still the chair today. And he's just a phenomenal person. He's done so much. I don't think we're probably up to at least 6, if not 7 digits for the number of trees that he's planted in Canada. He founded the Highway to Heroes. So we're having the trees line the 401 where the soldiers come back. And it's an environmentalist. It's not an industry association. It's an environmental organization at its core. And we're all volunteers. But there are other groups like that there's the Natural Burial Association, and we decided we're just going to focus on the province of Ontario because the way the legislation works, it's provincial and it's so complicated. It's crazy you want to help the whole country, but it's a handful. So we just are managing with Ontario right now. But there are amazing little pockets of local advocacy groups all around, and they take every kind of shape and form. There's, groups like Ottawa and Kingston and Haliburton that have websites and organized meetings, and one's got a co-op with bylaws. And then there's a nun in North Bay who wants a natural burial ground, but she's got to convince the bishop. Or, there's a person with a farmer in West Grey who would like to have a burial there. And the one that's most exciting and topical right now is this wonderful woman by the name of Sarah Benjamin, who has 100 acres in Grey Highlands. And she presented to the local council there, and they've moved it forward. And everybody there got a notice in the mail saying, hey, what do you think about natural burial? Issue your submissions. And so that's super exciting. So, but it's definitely takes a village.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot, because I think it's a true example of a grassroots movement gaining momentum, right? Everyone's coming together. And I love that you say you're an environmental organization, which is just interesting to think of death as an environmental issue, right? I often think you see it become medicalized. You obviously, there's a part of death that involves like lawyers and taxes and estates being, divvied up and things like that. But to bring the environment into it is just to hear you say that's really, really neat.
Yeah. So maybe for our listeners, just clarifying what you're advocating for as the Natural Burial Association. What are some of these things that you're really excited about? In contrast, and we'll maybe get into this in terms of what's happening more on the conventional side of things in that industry.
Okay. First of all, I have to compliment you for referring to the mowed lawn gravestoned cemeteries as conventional, because we like to think of ourselves as traditional, but everybody calls them traditional. So good on you, Richard.
I'm a naturopath. I'm used to this terminology.
Okay, so, yay.
Yeah.
It's like we're also trying to say natural burial, not green burial, because there's so much greenwash out there. So excellent. So we believe that natural burial is one way to protect hundreds of acres of nature in Ontario. And in so doing, it also has that wonderful benefit of being able to give people an option at death that may align with their values. So if all through life they've chosen to walk or bike instead of drive, they've chosen to get a glass of water instead of bottled water, all those things, and then they are able to do their last act. Their parting gift is actually giving back to the earth. So that's an extraordinarily beautiful thing. And so, yeah, that is our mission. I'll tell you what natural burial is.
Yeah.
There's two aspects. There's what happens below ground and what happens above ground. So below ground, the body is buried in a biodegradable casket or shroud, and there's no embalming. It's buried shallower than in your conventional cemetery, because that's where all that biological activity takes place, and that's how you are better able to give back to the earth, to nourish the earth and the soil. And above ground, there is either no marker. Oh, I should mention one other thing. And there's no vaults. Conventional cemeteries often have bylaws that insist upon vaults, which is like a concrete block that goes around the casket. And so then above ground, this is where it's really exciting. And we always talk about natural burial, but in fact, anybody can have a natural burial. Cemeteries have to allow a section where you can be buried naturally. But what we really mean, and what we're talking about today, is natural burial grounds. And that is when on top that land is restored to its natural ecohabitat. And that's what's super, super exciting. So it's like, throw out any idea of a cemetery the way you see it to it today. This is going to be meadow and forested areas. And it's like Mother Nature is the steward of this cemetery, not lawnmowers and pesticides and all that stuff. So it's a beautiful new concept. Some of the natural burial grounds, instead of having individual markers, they have a communal marker. So say sourcing a local boulder, and it just has the name of the individuals. And so for the families, it's like that whole landscape is their, their loved one's plot, not just like that 4x10 area, but that whole thing they consider their own. They can always find out where their loved one is legally. One always has to be able to find out. So it's through GPS, and or sometimes they do have individual markers, like little stone, flat stone, again, just has the name, very modest, that's placed there. So there's the cemeteries that are either natural burial grounds or conservation burial grounds, going one step further and partnering with the land trust. They're pulling out the invasive species. They're putting in the bird houses that would be, help with the migratory birds of the season. They're planting the native trees. They're doing amazing work to bring back and restore that land to its natural ecohabitat.
That sounds amazing. I'm trying to envision what that would look like, and I'm sure that could vary.
Yeah, well, you can a little bit on the Instagram there, Susan. I saw you guys had a plot caretaker, and it was a sheep grazing essentially in a picture. I saw that there, and I thought, like that's quite the scene, right? Compared to the rather well manicured cemeteries we're used to seeing, right? So
yeah, if you imagine a conservation area, well, that's a natural burial ground. And we spoke with the Ontario Land Trust Association a couple of weeks ago, because our mission is so similar. We want to engage people in nature, and we want to preserve nature. The only difference is they work more with people who are alive, and we're a little concentrating more on people who are dead, right? But other than that, our goals are the same. So
right.
And so what does a scenario like that look like? So you've got this 100-acre plot of land that maybe someone has bequeathed to the Natural Burial Association, or to be designated as a natural burial site. Like in terms of land management in that, it's not necessarily just kind of let it go wild per se. There's probably some finessing that goes on. What does that look like potentially? Like who's managing that? How does that work?
Well, sadly, in Ontario, we don't have that scenario to describe to you, but I can use some of the U.S. examples. And I should also clarify that the Natural Burial Association, we're not going to be running. We're not interested in running the business. We're facilitating the creation. So if someone, and people have come to us with property, then we do what we can to help them get it off the ground. But so in the beautiful natural burial grounds that are in the hundreds in the UK and in the US, and there are lots in Australia too, although I know less about them. They have trails. They may have a golf cart to help people who need, or have accessibility challenges to actually get to the plot. Some of them have, they can have beehives or butterfly pollinators or bird watching tours. They may have a building for ceremonies. They may not have a building. The infrastructure is all over the map. So there are some pathways for sure, but the burials can take place. They can take place in a woodlot, or they can take place in a meadow. So really, it doesn't look like even like an urban park. It's way more rustic than that.
See, I think that's great that there's such a diversity in the different natural areas that you're using, because for me, example, like I grew up in the Carolinian Forest area here in southwestern Ontario, and I just have I realize now I have a natural connection with that landscape, right? So to be able to choose what area you have, seeing as they hopefully are going to be starting to pop up more and more, to be able to choose an area that you actually love, I think that's great. I guess you have said a few times about in Ontario we don't have that many natural burial grounds right now, but what are some of the obstacles for people that are looking to get involved? I mean, what might you say to them? Where would help be needed, I guess, with what you guys are doing? What are the obstacles? As a consumer,
you mean?
Yeah, as a consumer, like if someone does have acreage and they'd like to donate, 50 acres or what have you, like what would you have to say as far as obstacles are for you guys?
Okay. Well, first of all, why don't I paint a picture of what is on the available in Ontario? Because there's two kinds of natural burial grounds. There's standalone natural burial grounds and there's hybrids. So standalones are typically in a rural area, and they're standing alone from a cemetery. They're not attached to a conventional cemetery. They're just a beautiful, beautiful plot of landscape in the countryside. They're standalones. They're, it depends if they're, say, a butt conservation land, then they really can be as small as, say, 5-8 acres. But if they're not, then you would need a minimum of 15 acres just so people get a sense that they're in nature, because that's what they want. They want to feel like their final rest is in nature, right? And so there are no standalones. In Canada, there are 2 standalones, both in BC. The first standalone in Canada was on Denman Island, and it's the Conservation Authority kind of deeded the land to these volunteers of the Memorial Society there. It's 1/4 acre, beautiful Douglas fir area. And that's only open to those people that live on Denman Island. And then late in December 2019, on Salt Springs Island, cemetery opened. It's about 13 acres, beautiful Douglas fir. It's wonderful. It's on a farm owned by a couple. She used to be, Kathy Valentine is her name. She used to be a yoga instructor. And they built this little gathering place from locally sourced timber. And apparently there's a little washroom with the most spectacular view, probably right in like a Johnny in the spot in the middle of the forest. And they just, the posts of the birds that they have there, and it's just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. So those are the standalones, and that's what everybody really dreams of, including us. What we have now in Ontario that are, in our view at the Natural Burial Association, like bang on models of good hybrids. So they're attached to the conventional cemetery. There's one the first one was in Cobourg, and it's a father and son team, and they, it's only about 1/4 acre, but again, it's attached to the Cobourg Creek. So it feels like, you really feel like you're in nature. When I took the train out there and I walked through the conventional cemetery, and I got to the section I didn't need to be told. It was the natural burial area. I could just see there was like a whole field of Queen Anne's lace. It was stunningly beautiful. They dig the graves by hand. They pull out the invasive dogweed by hand, dig and pull it out. Like, so a beautiful thing. I think they've even created their own shroud. So that's really neat. In Niagara Falls, there's a 2 acre hybrid, and it's called Willow's Rest, and it's part of Fairview Cemetery. They've got the beehives, butterfly pollinators. They planted 400 trees, native species, of course. They have school groups coming in and planting wildflower plugs, like, unheard of. Imagine kids in a cemetery, but it's great what they're doing. So they're fantastic. In Picton, there's an acre of woodlot. That's our only woodlot option. And there's people from Ottawa that are coming down to Picton because they just so love the idea of natural burial and this particular cemetery. So it's about an acre, but it's all forested. And the woman who runs it, Helma Onk, she has a background in landscaping. So she knows, where to place the burials amongst the tree roots so they're not hurt. And the day that I visited there, I saw a deer. So, that speaks volumes, right? Mm-hmm. And the Waterloo also has a really beautiful one. They've got 2 osprey nests, again, a whole field of black-eyed Susan. So those, there are some, there aren't enough. It's just, there's Guelph's going to open one, Hamilton's going to open one. But yeah, we need more. We definitely need more.
A handful then. So what are some of the obstacles then in getting more? Is it just needing more kind of awareness or grassroots interest from people that are demanding this? Or is there red tape from the government, say, or what exactly is the obstacles? Yeah.
Both. So from the consumer side, there's really low awareness. Did you know about, well, maybe Richard, because of your work, you knew about it, but yeah, maybe you did.
Honestly,
maybe you
and I think what it was for me, and just to kind of give you my perspective as someone who's into nature connection and that, that we're always, I think humanity's always kind of wrestling with the lines of returning to nature and then enjoying some of the modern comforts of civilization and technology, right? So when this topic comes up for me, I love the idea, and honestly, I can't say that I've committed to it, because in my mind I've thought always of doing cremation. And again, I'm not set on that because I'm young and I hope to live a long time still before I have to make that decision. But this, I find it kind of just, it strikes a chord that might seem a little bit kind of like a discomfort when I think about this concept. But then when I think about the other, really, I'm kind of getting the same discomfort. So maybe that's part of the, I didn't really think much of it. So not to say I didn't know about it, but I didn't really realize it was an option, partly because I maybe assumed that it's just illegal. I don't know.
Well, yeah, you've touched on a whole bunch of points there that are obstacles. Like the number one is that people don't know about it. So we have to build awareness. We don't really can't quantify it. Somewhere in between 10 and 20% of people even know about it. And then if they know about it, they might think it's illegal. It's not. That's the way that so many of the indigenous and the settlers were buried before this became a commercialized business, right? So definitely is not illegal. Or they might be fearful that there's water contamination, or that they will be dug up by scavengers, and none of those have taken place or are borne out. So there's that. And then the other thing is that, well, I'll give you an example. We wrote a blog in Dying with Dignity. And then after that, I got a email from this lovely woman from Peterborough. And she said, I read your blog. I consider myself, progressive, and I always try to make green choices. And I had no idea that cremation wasn't eco-friendly. I thought it was. And now I want a natural burial. And by the way, my husband and I have 100 acres. Can we turn it into a natural burial ground? So that's the kind of stuff that happens when people hear about it. And it's really tricky when we're talking because people so appreciate, environmentally conscientious people appreciate learning of the harm of cremation. But at the same time, we have to be really mindful that for some religions, for some cultures, cremation is part of their death practices, right? For instance, in the Hindu religion, they cremate because they don't think that there's any value in the dead body. And then it quickly allows the soul to go on, to be reincarnated into the next life. So this isn't about a movement to convince everybody that for the sake of the environment, we all have to be naturally buried. This is just one more option for people for whom it aligns with their values.
I see.
And so I did have a question around that, and you're kind of answering it to a degree, but it's like, how do more traditional, some of the obstacles are the red tape, some of the obstacles are the absence of land that is appropriately delegated for this sort of thing. But then you have, on top of that, then you're kind of butting up against a corporate industry, which is another sort of thing of its own, trying to make headway through something like that. But then there is the faith and the tradition and all of those ingrained things like you're alluding to with, say, cremation, or how things play out culturally. And so, but going back to a comment you made toward the beginning of our podcast about the nun, I don't know where you said she's from, but having to convince the bishop. And so that's where I kind of get excited, or even a little more, is how does this concept have the potential to dovetail with entrenched cultural ritual and perspective, right? Is there room for a Catholic person to have their rights met, but then follow it up with a natural burial? Like, it doesn't mean you have to, do it a certain way all the way into the nth degree in terms of how you're buried, right?
Yeah. Well, there are some beautiful, at least I know of one lovely natural burial ground run by a Catholic cemetery in Minneapolis. And the Pope is very green. So there's nothing in the Bible or their practices that would indicate that it's not relevant and appropriate for them to pursue. And I should say that this nun, is she's partnering with a Muslim and an Anglican minister. So like, how cute is that? There's faiths that practice natural burial today, right? The Jewish religion, they believe in, getting back to the earth, and their body is washed. They're not embalmed. They're in a very simple casket, and they're buried very quickly after their death. And so that's a natural burial. And the Muslim religion, the same thing. They are buried quickly. They're washed. The body is washed, and they're buried facing Mecca. It's a natural burial. They have a very modest stone placed on top of the grave. So it's not in a natural burial ground per se, but it would be of interest to them to be in a natural burial ground because it does fit with their doctrine.
Yeah, so it's not like we're reinventing a wheel here, or trying to force a way of doing things. It's just could be consistent with established tradition, which is encouraging for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the cremation that is right now, the rate of cremation in Ontario is about 70%. It's 90% in BC. So we can only imagine that it's going to go up higher. And, it's a pretty recent tradition, right? That's like the 50s where that cremation started to become popular. So this isn't something that's really entrenched in our values at any rate.
Yeah. And just
the practice unfolded.
Right. And just backpedaling a little bit too, in terms of, you had mentioned sort of being buried or sort of moving on to the next life in a way that's consistent with the person's values throughout their life, right? Like using a glass of water versus a plastic bottle. But then in the end, we don't think about the impact that our remains have if they are conventionally dealt with, right? Through embalming practices in particular. And
we don't think about death, period, in our culture.
Yeah, exactly. Right, yeah. But so we've talked about the beautiful meadows and everything, but sort of on the other end of the scale is, there's a lot of chemicals used. There's a lot of detriment there as well, right? Never mind just the vault itself, the casket itself, but what happens in the embalming process. And if you sort of scale that out on a mass scale of, yearly deaths, that's holds some weight in terms of environmental impact.
Yeah, there used to be a stat in wide circulation about you could rebuild the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge every year with all the metal alone, never mind the beautiful hardwood that's used to build caskets. Now, whether that's still applicable, given that in the US it's 50% cremation now, I don't know, but you get the point. And they have stats about, being able to pave a road with the concrete vaults that's like in embalming actually doesn't do a lot of damage to the soil. Where it does do damage is to the embalmers. They have 8 times the rate of leukemia than the general pop. Really? And they have 3 times the rate of ALS. So that's really alarming. So that's and I guess there's the other thing that the people that are interested in natural burial. Sean, you alluded to this. It does take. It is humbling because it is about decay and decomposition, and it does place you in this big, huge, vast natural world. And now I forget my train of thought, but so it's I think it's scary for a lot of people to think about that, to embrace that. But when they are there at a natural burial, they're really, really moved. And it doesn't help us to sanitize and avoid death. And, the body disappears and it comes back in an urn with ashes a couple days later. Like, to be there and see ourselves in that big circle of life can be a very, very meaningful thing. And there's lots of reasons why people like natural burial, giving back to the earth, their final rest being in nature, that kind of thing. But the thing that's hard to describe is how people are really moved when they're there in the ceremony. It's just, it allows for more participation. People sometimes are allowed to dig the grave, or they're certainly allowed to fill in the grave, and they can lower their loved one. And it can be, it just is really meaningful. I don't know, would it be trite to give an example of my dog's natural burial?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So my dog Gracie, our dog died in February, and I felt so privileged that I had been exposed to all these wonderful ideas about death, and so could approach it differently. And my parents live in the country, so the week before we were going to say goodbye to her, we went up there and we went through the forest, and we collected cedar boughs to line her grave, and then we collected pine cones so we could shape a heart on top of the snow, and then we the day came, and we couldn't dig the grave. It was just too hard. So what happened was, that came to our home in the city, and it was actually a very beautiful thing. And then I had made a playlist, and my friends were going, really? Like, you could be in the car with a dead dog? Like, ugh. But it was just the most profound hour. I don't think any of us spoke to each other, but the music, and then, was incredible. And we needed that to soak in. And then we got there, and it was too hard. It was the middle of winter. We couldn't dig. And so a neighbor with a backhoe came, and I was kind of freaking out because the backhoe was going down too deep. And I'm like, no, that's, she's got to be shallower to help with the revitalization of the soil. And then we had a beautiful day. We put down the cedar boughs, and then put down Gracie, and said our goodbyes, and then spent hours outside in nature filling it up, and then put the little pine heart on top. And the whole thing was just so beautiful to be involved like that. And if I hadn't been living and breathing this, crazy natural burial life, I wouldn't have known to do that. It was just so beautiful. And we went back into the house, and my father had champagne for us to celebrate she had been a incredible dog, so to celebrate Gracie's life. And we looked out the window, and there were 6 deer not far from her grave. And like, we've seen 1 deer or 2 deer, but there's 6 deer. So that whole thing, it just, like, the absolute, the beautiful part of the nature, and going back to nature, it was amazing. But I have to say, like, I've had moments where I'm like, oh, thank goodness she was way deeper, because I didn't like the idea of anything touching her. Like, right. Okay, that's good. Because it does. It takes a little bit. I don't know if the word is courage, but then if I thought, my daughter said, yeah, but imagine the cremation. That's so violent. And she's right. That's like a scary, scary thing. And I guess, Richard, I didn't answer your question about, we talked about formaldehyde and the harm to the environment from a conventional burial, but cremation, the thing about cremation is that it takes a lot of fossil fuel to burn the body, right? You're there for 2 to 3 hours at like somewhere between 800 to 1200 degrees. So that's a lot of energy that's required there.
And I wonder if sort of these statistics going up around cremation have to do with the fact that it's probably one of the more cost-effective ways to move on to the next chapter of your soul's journey, right? And that's a big piece. So if there could be something along the natural burial perspective that doesn't involve, a $7,000 casket or a headstone that's a couple grand or all that sort of stuff, right? Then maybe that statistically becomes, more appealing too, because it's consistent with values. It's actually not going to break the bank for those who are left holding the bag and all that sort of stuff. So I just wonder about that aloud.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have to be mindful that cremation is the least expensive way of taking care of our dead, and 99% of the natural burial grounds do also welcome cremains, and they can be mixed with soil and then a tree planted on top. So even or even if they're not, if it's an urn, there's still their presence there is protecting that land in its natural state in perpetuity. So there is goodness in that respect. And then the other cool thing that's coming down the pipeline is that there was a funeral home in Newmarket that took BAO, the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, to court because they wanted to have offer alkaline hydrolysis. So alkaline hydrolysis, also known as aquamation, also known as water cremation, also known as recomposition, is when it's, imagine, for me, it kind of looks like one of those MRI tunnels, and the body is put in there with water and heat, like a temperature of 150 degrees Celsius, and potassium hydroxide, and the soft tissues after 2 or 3 hours dissolve to nothing, and then what comes out is white bones, and then those bones are treated in the same way they would with flame cremation, which is they're kind of crushed by, it's called a cremator, and so it's the same result of ashes, and that's about 1/10 of the carbon footprint of flame cremation. So that's exciting too. And that, that fellow in Newmarket, he won, and it's now allowed. It's been practiced with animals for a long period of time, and on farms, that kind of thing. So it's great that that's now available. There are not that many funeral homes that offer it now, but that's coming down the pipeline. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I want to recap just for the listener's sake, and I will mention also that everything's going to be available in the show notes over at rewildmybio.com/natural burial. But specifically what I heard you say was the concrete that goes down into the earth, that could very well pave the highways of the whole United States. So that's obviously has like an impact on the environment. The gas from the cremation, the carbon, the formaldehyde, and that's was interesting to hear you say that that's of harm to the staff doing the embalming. And then, of course, the potential for leakage into, the land and whatnot itself. So is that essentially, that's kind of if you were to look at the environmental.
Apparently it doesn't hurt the land.
Yes, really, eh? So it doesn't have an impact there. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, neat. So that's what I did want to kind of circle back to what you had mentioned earlier in regards to your dog's natural burial and just that whole process. And I'm just thinking of nature connection and its impact on our feelings of, positive effect and overall like positive mood, right? So to be in those environments during that time of grief, I could just imagine the support of nature just kind of assisting with the whole healing process of death. And I know I've participated in a funeral before where I've been able to put dirt onto a friend's casket, and it means I think so much more. And again, it makes saying goodbye a little bit easier in my experience. So yeah, I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, or if it makes it harder, that's good too, right? Like if the closer we get to acknowledging what is happening, then it does heal us in the end too. Like it doesn't, I have been involved in, my brother died in December 2019, and I followed the kind of practices of my family, and it was a cremation, and it was very like stiff upper lip, and I don't think that helps anybody heal. I think that the more that we, like, it is this for a lot of us, not everybody, but particularly because there's a big swath of secular population here, that being so out of touch with their own mortality serves no purpose. And so I think the natural burial, because you might feel a little alien if don't go to church, but you're in a church, or don't go to synagogue and then you're in a synagogue. But when you're in nature, it's profound, even when it's not surrounding a death, right? But when you're there with a death, it's more spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having worked in the funeral industry for a couple of years, a few years back, to see the impact in my own processes of loss. I lost my father when I was about 25, and the importance of ritual, the importance of connection, the importance of understanding in a very felt sense way the cycle of life and death and the passing on, and what that does actually feel like on a visceral level for somebody who loses a loved one, and having to engage processes that allow you to work through those stages of grief is extremely important as our social psyche, our own individual psyches, and our own relationship to our own mortality. And so it's important to have those pieces. And I think that this natural burial component really touches on something in our DNA that's ancient, right? Like we talk a lot about sort of evolutionary biology on this show, but this is sort of evolutionary, like spiritual psychology too, right? Of like, what is our relationship to death and what's our relationship to nature? And so the more connected we become to nature, the more connected we become to the cycles of life and death. And we kind of see ourselves in that. And so when you talked about the school kids going to this natural burial ground, that sounds like a really, really healthy thing to me, where kids can see, oh, that this is where grandpa's going to like become a bed of flowers or a tree, right? And how that it's just part of the cycle, and that you can go through these pieces. And it doesn't mean you have to not be in pain. Doesn't mean you're not sad, but it means it's part of the process. And I think that's like, you can't really measure the impact of that. And so in my own instance, my father, when he passed away, he was very earthy, the garden, the herbs, all of those things. And I connect to him every day when I'm outside. If I see a cardinal or if I'm in the garden, that's how I'm connecting to him. In the 20 something years since his passing, I've been to his grave site twice, I think, because it's a big mowed piece of lawn up by the airport in Toronto, planes flying overhead, huge wind gusts coming through. It feels like the most desolate place on earth when I go there. I don't feel connected to him there. So to have that opportunity to connect with a loved one in a space that actually is helping your nervous system to heal, helping you to connect, helping you to see these cycles is, I think, amazing. And to your point, I wasn't fully aware of to what degree, natural burial was sort of maybe gaining some steam or at least advocacy in Ontario, which is really, really encouraging, because I, for myself, have, when I contemplate this, I don't have a clear vision of how I want to go. But now it's starting to crystallize. I'm like, if this is an option, I'm going for this option, hands down. So I just want to say, thank you for the work you do and sort of bringing this into the public eye, having these conversations. Like, we're having a pretty casual conversation about death here, right, which might freak some people out, but it's important. And so I think what you guys are doing is a good thing.
Well, the opera's never over till the fat lady sings. So we got to get those standalones going. And, you were asking about the red tape, and it's holy cow. It's a complicated sector. Like, in a way, it's great that we live in a culture that has so much respect for the dead. But Ontario has some really tough legislature. So and it's different because the kind of people that are starting natural burial grounds, if we look at the US and UK's examples, it's not the chains that are starting it. It's yoga teachers or Unitarian ministers or disillusioned funeral directors or environmentalists. So, and they're doing it. They're doing this out of passion. They're not doing this for profit. And so there's a lot of hurdles. One that just came down the pipeline that we're pretty upset about is either the Bereavement Authority of Ontario or the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services just upped fee that you have to pay to start a new cemetery from $100,000 to $165,000, like a 65% increase goes into effect January 2022. And since the current existing cemeteries are grandfathered in, they can get new land. And if their it's called the maintenance fund is in good standing, then they don't need to cough up that extra, $100,000, now $165,000. But a new one, which is likely to be a natural burial ground, would. So we're like, wow. So we're going to take that on because that just seems really punitive to natural burial grounds. And it's tough because the municipalities, there's so many of them that have declared that there's a climate emergency and they wanted to do more to protect their land, but they don't really like cemeteries because cemeteries don't pay taxes, and it locks that land in forever as can't be developed. So, and the third thing is, if a cemetery fills up, then and closes down, it legally has to become the responsibility of the municipality to maintain control. So not only are we going to task for this crazy 65% increase in the maintenance fund, but we're working towards allowing grave reuse. So this is something that's practiced in Europe. It's practiced in Quebec. There's a cemetery in Vancouver that does it. And what it is that after a period of time, say 25 years, 50 years, depends on the soil, we would go into that plot. And if there was any remnants of that individual, a titanium hip would go for recycling. But if there was, any bone or anything left, it wouldn't be removed. It would just be dug a little deeper so someone could go on top. And then that would mean that that cemetery is always going to be sustainable, and it's maintained by Mother Nature. And so the municipality doesn't have to worry about it. So that's we're trying to pave the path in which there's just the hope in hell that we can get a standalone. So that's what we're up against.
It seems like another return to the new old way, right? Where it's like, this is actually sustainable going forward. Whereas, I always thought as a kid, like, if there's a lot of people on the earth and we all die and everyone goes in a cemetery, we're going to run out of land, right? And now I see some of the headache to the municipality or the owners and all that. And again, just putting more, as you're saying that, I'm just kind of starting to envision myself going and being, naturally buried, essentially, right? Like, it just makes more and more sense as we talk about it. That's why I think this is important.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's why, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because we'll see in our social media feed, there's people who are super green and they like the idea, but they're like, oh, that would just take up too much land. I think because, like, just when you were a kid, you imagine just more and more and more cemeteries. And so we could, write back and say, but it's natural land, but there's still like, how long would it be sustainable if, say, 50% of the population decided they wanted to be buried naturally and there was no grave reuse? So that we are hoping, if we have grave reuse, then we can write back to those people and say, not to worry, right. Yeah. It's going to be recycled over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I see. What else? I guess what's next for Natural Burial Association? And I mean, what types of things are you guys working on right now? Is there anything, I guess, specifically that we haven't maybe touched on, that the direction of things?
There's the most topical one right now is in Grey Highlands. There's a lovely woman who lives with her family on 100 acres near Euphrasia, and she has we presented to the council there, and that has gone out. The public notices have gone out to, I think they landed every household to say, hey, there's talk of a natural burial ground. What do you think? So it's been a fantastic week. It's just so beautiful, the number of people that have come forward that belong to environmental groups there. And they said, how can we help? We love this idea. And so they're helping us spread the word so that people write positive feedback to the clerk at Grey Highlands, clerk@greyhighlands.ca. So that's one initiative. There's pockets all over that are I just feel like something's going to, this time next year, if we spoke again, I would have some really good concrete. There's in Kingston, there's a dynamic advocacy group there, and they got Kingston to pass a motion, which I'll paraphrase. It's something to the effect of, whereas natural burial is good for the environment, and whereas cremation is bad for the environment, whereas we want to be a sustainable city, whereas we would like Kingston to have the first standalone natural burial ground in Ontario. So we're like, woo-hoo-hoo. Right. So that's good. Don't count your chickens till they're hatched, but still looking good. So there's a farmer in West Grey who's got acres that she'd like to have as a natural burial ground. So spoke to this guy in the UK who oversees 10 farmer / natural burial grounds. And that's a really neat concept, right? It's diverse income for the farmers over there. So imagine your loved one is buried and then the sheep are in the pasture there. So that's a beautiful thing. So maybe we can open up the door to that, but we don't, and we don't know all of the obstacles yet. Like it's just that fund increase was a little bit of alarm for us. But we hope that the industry will appreciate that this is something that the consumer really wants. But
that farmer natural burial site combo's compelling. It's like a whole new degree of regenerative farming, which we talked about on the show.
Right, yeah.
So along this thread, where do you see this in 10 years? Where do you want to see it?
I would love to see across Canada, but obviously we're focusing on Ontario now. I would like to see that everybody knows about this option. And I would love if it could be, financially accessible to a lot of people, because it would be pretty sad if there's somebody who's environmentally conscientious and it's not accessible. So I hope it stays in the right hands of people that are there for the right reasons. It's there to save the environment and give this beautiful option to people who choose it. And I'd like to say that, I'm going to throw this out. Let's say like 500 acres across Canada are protected nature where people are buried. Maybe 1,000. I don't know.
Let's go for 1,000.
I'm not good at geography.
That's 100 a year, I think, for 10 years. Would be 1,000, right?
I could see it. I got that feeling about this that I do when I feel like something's gonna catch, right, and this kind of has that feeling to me. So yeah, I'm really happy to just really learned a lot from you today about this, for my own knowledge and consideration, and then of course for the listeners and sharing that with them. Richard, do you have any other questions for our guests before we?
No, I think we've kind of really done a nice job, I think, of sort of illustrating what this is about, why it's important, and how it's important to maybe start thinking about these things. And just want to say thank you for your time and for the work that you and your association are doing.
Thank you. We'll keep doing it.
Yeah.
Anybody can visit our website, naturalburialassociation.ca. There's tons of info there. I think we're up to about 30 FAQs, and that's a good starting point.
That's awesome.
Register your support.
Yes, I will definitely make sure I link all that in the show notes for everybody. And again, that's at rewildmybio.com/natural-burial. And then I guess, Susan, before we let you go, the same question I ask every guest at the end of every episode is, what is your wildest dream for the earth? You can in relation to what we're chatting about or wherever you're feeling.
I feel like it can't be in relation to what we're chatting about, because that's imposing my values, and death. There's so many different takes on death around the world, and that you're asking a worldwide question. So that would be inappropriate to impose my values there. But I feel like for the work that's ahead for the Natural Burial Association and all the other advocates out there, I find myself grateful that I live in a democracy, as flawed as it is. And I feel like, I'm just like, I'm so used to, there's so much news about those countries that don't have it, and China or Putin, and I no longer take it for granted. And I'm so buoyed by like the work that Environmental Defense and Ontario Nature and David Suzuki Foundation did. Like it was because of democracy that they were able to stop that crazy Highway 413 that was going to be built through beautifully rich biodiverse area and wetlands. And so it just made me think, okay, it's a flawed system democracy, but that's the playground that I'm going to at least have to work in to see if we can't kibosh this crazy maintenance fee and change some of the legislation. And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to do that. And I wish that upon other countries when I hear about, how they are restricted and can't do that. So I guess it's a flawed system, but I feel like if I didn't have democracy, we couldn't even do this.
Well, I can appreciate
So
that coming.
I wish for more benevolent democratic countries.
Yeah. And I think your success here with the Natural Burial Association speaks volumes to the importance of having that freedom of choice and democracy and being able to create grassroots movements and change, right? And I see this as being, again, a good example of that. So yeah, thanks for saying that. Indeed.
Yeah, I do feel privileged that we even have the option of ideally affecting change.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you so much. And thank you for highlighting, the beauty that can come with death. Because like you mentioned, we are a society that doesn't often speak about death. And I think having a better relationship with that is good for our mental well-being. And again, this specifically through this method helps connect us to nature forever and ever.
Nothing wilder than from dust to dust.
Yeah, right. Totally. So yeah. Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us. Thanks very much. And I'll make sure everything is, linked in the show notes for all you guys listening. If you guys have a minute, if you enjoyed this one, please share it with a friend. And as always, stay wild. Thank you for listening to the Rewild My Bio podcast. Please subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star rating if you have enjoyed this episode. I have so much gratitude for all of you who continue to share this show with your friends. It really does mean so much to me. If you want more content from Rewild My Bio, then please check out rewildmybio.com to find previous episodes and sign up for the newsletter. In the newsletter, I share blogs I have written and reflections from my current health promotion research. Please follow along on Instagram and Telegram with the handle @RewildMyBio and on Twitter @Sean Slade. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, stay wild.